Amundsen. I focus a lot on architecture, large-scale architecture, and a lot of API design work.
All right, I'm Ronnie, and that's what I focus on. There's two things. They sound like they're opposites: security and design and user experience. I think they're very similar, and that's my focus.
My main areas of research are API strategy and API architecture.
Okay.
Okay, so that's everybody. We have quite a few things to talk about, but if there's anything in particular you guys want to start with, let me know. I do have a few articles here that I want to go through that we can discuss to kind of get the topic started and get the discussion going. So if there's anything in particular you guys want to talk about first, let me know. I was going to start.
Let me point out one quick thing. If you're watching this WebEx, there's a little button in I think the top right of where Jose's picture is or where my picture is. If you click that, you get a view of our faces because we're not doing any slides. So you might prefer that to the small view of us. It's your choice.
Yeah. So if you would like to see our faces any larger, that's a recommendation. And you guys can chat in some questions too from the sidebar if you'd like. We'll be reading those and trying to answer them as we go as well. So just make sure to remember that. But I wanted to start off with the article about ESPN closing their API. I know this was, I mean, from the emails I've seen, some people were shocked, some people were not. So I want to see what the rest of the panelists kind of think about this. How do you feel about this article? Give me your thoughts.
Well, I'll start. You know, I kind of wasn't surprised because, you know, I forget who it was in the group. I think Irakli might have mentioned it. It's really about products. It's about what it's, you know, the problem it's solving for people and you know, what people need it for. So I think it probably just wasn't solving any real problem or gaining them any real edge in any, you know, product space.
Thing I remember when that API was launched, I don't know if it was still true at the end. People were kind of surprised at the terms of service, about, you know, whether they could make money on it, and it looked like you couldn't build anything that could be profitable for you on top of that. That really limits, you know, what can be built with it. And again, that goes back to what Mike is saying. And what was the purpose of that thing? What were they trying to achieve? And it seems like whatever it was, they didn't get there.
Right, that's what I think, yeah.
Right. Holger, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm trying to think how not to be too contrarian, which will probably, I will fail miserably. I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if we see actually a lot of more public APIs being shut down, because my gut feeling is there's a certain media hype around public APIs, and that somehow they are, you know, like with an apple pie, you just have to have one, and otherwise you're not going to be competitive. And I think in a lot of cases, I think most of those companies are either not exposing the right assets or don't have assets which you can successfully exposed to those APIs. And I think the transformative aspect of APIs is more in partner APIs and closed APIs, or in controlled APIs, and not so much in open APIs. And I think at some point you look at the cost and you look at the impact that public API is doing, and you're saying, well, why am I doing this? Why am I spending my money on this, even though it's not really creating any monetary or financial impact? So I think there's also, so I wonder if that whole public API, if ESPN or CNN or how they all are known, if they really need a public API, if there's really a business use for it. That's my take.
Right. Holger, we do have a request if you could mute yourself while you're not speaking because your mic is picking up the audio. Those are great points. Do we have anyone else who'd like to chime in on that? We have a question come in as well. But if there's any more opinions on the matter, we can get to that as well.
A couple of things I wanted to say about that is I think that ESPN shutting down its public API is disappointing in the specific case. That would have been awesome if there was a great public API for a great content provider like ESPN. But where I disagree with some of the people who have expressed this feeling is that I don't think that really means much for the public APIs in general. So I would say it's like if your neighborhood pizza shop shuts down, that's going to be inconvenient, right? Because you maybe like that pizza a lot. That doesn't mean that we're going to stop, in general, liking pizza as a culinary great product that it is, right? So specific API shutting down, I think, has a lot to do with whether they made as a product or not in the marketplace, whether there was a product market fit, whether it was thought through, was demand, could be capitalized. I think that public APIs as a notion have a bright future, and there will always be a place for them in the marketplace. As far as specific APIs, we have seen a couple of those shutting down, and that is disappointing, but I would not go as far as making any far-fetched conclusions about public APIs in general, just because a couple of prominent public APIs have ceased to exist.
I don't think we're saying different things. I mean, I think that if you have a good business case and you're treating your API as a product, and you know why you have an API, I think the API continues to be a good investment. But my gut feeling is there are a lot of zombies out there who simply build an API for the sake of an API. And I don't think that approach will be very successful. And I think there are many less companies out there who are knowing why they have an API versus companies who have an API just for the sake of an API.
It sounds like you're almost describing in the early days of the web when everyone needed a website. We saw all these companies, there was no real business value to what they were doing. And then there was this kind of balancing where we found out who had actual value and who didn't. So maybe we're on the cusp of that, right, with public APIs. Who knows?
I think that's a great point. I agree with Holger that we're probably going to see more API shutting down. There were a lot of them that were launched without any product design and business strategy around them. And I'm not saying that was the case for ESPN or Netflix. There are also outliers all the time in the marketplace. But I think much like pets.com shutting down didn't mean much for e-commerce, and there was Amazon that has been around for years now and very profitable. I think seeing some of the product like APIs, public APIs shutting down shouldn't lead us to conclude that public APIs are a bad idea.
So you think you still have a job after tomorrow?
I think so. We have a question in through the chat. If we'd like to start getting to those. We have a question from Sean Pan. He asks, in the SSO world with RESTful architecture, is there more standardization of how the post method can authenticate credentials should be done? Method of auth credentials should be done.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Is anybody else?
We could ask if Sean Tan, if you could clarify a little bit more, we would love to answer your question. If the panel needs a bit more clarification, we'll jump off to the next question as well. We have a few other ones here. We have one from Naveen Gupta. He'd like to know if we can share some insights into where the industry is in adapting to REST APIs.
Want to take that one?
Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
So this is trends in the future. What? Say again, because you're breaking up a little for me.
Some insight into where the industry is in adapting to true REST APIs, but I mean with true hypermedia style APIs.
Oh, okay. Well, I definitely think I see more talk about hypermedia. I think we just had the API Craft event a few weeks ago in Detroit, where they had a panel of some of the really big designers in this hypermedia API space, and it ended up being a center of conversation for a couple of days. The Craft event is a really cool sort of open conference event. So there's definitely a lot more interest in it. I don't think Gartner's done a trough of or whatever it is, that little tool they do, but I think we're probably about to hit that trough of disillusionment on this hypermedia API space. We've been pretty high on the hype, so I definitely see people asking more questions about it when I'm in the field and visiting. And there's some real interest. There's some very creative tooling going on. A guy by the name of Stephen Mazzell is building some very cool stuff in Git around hypermedia. But there's a lot of work to be done yet. I think the biggest thing that's missing is tooling, and that's holding a lot back. So there's a lot of interest, and we'll just have to see what it really turns into over the next month or year or so.
Okay. Does anybody else want to chime in on that? I think, Mike, you're just too good at hypermedia. I don't think anybody else wants to compete with you on that. We have another question in here. So James is asking, am I wrong to think that an API is not a product? An API is just a way of delivering a product. The actual product is the resource that the API exposes. Anybody have any opinion on that? Maybe.
Yes, I have an opinion on that, and it's the right one.
Okay.
But I tried to, just a little bit of feedback, I tried to type into that Q&A. I guess that's not enabled, right?
It is, yeah.
Okay. So anyhow, so yes, API is just a means to an end. And ultimately, you're exposing a business asset, and that business asset decides if your API is going to apply or not. I mean, I don't know, you guys probably also use AWS API, and I wouldn't call that really a beautiful API. Yet I keep using it because the service I'm using through AWS is just, that's what I want. And then actually putting up, and I know Ron is probably going to jump up and down right now. I'm even going to put up with less than ideal API if the service is compatible enough.
Exactly. I would love to hear your opinion on this one.
Yeah, I very strongly disagree with that view of APIs. I think that there are services that are means to the end, but I, as strongly as I possibly could, think that APIs are products in and of themselves. And that's simply starting by the definition of a product, right? So product, if you look at Wikipedia definition, is anything that has demand and that could be sold or offered in the marketplace. And most definitely API meets that definition. There is definitely a market for specifically APIs. And we also see a lot of businesses where API is clearly the product in and of itself, which probably the most well-known example of that is Twilio, right? The telephony business where they literally do not. Basically, if you're not familiar with Twilio, it allows you to use a very simple API to do something that is actually very complicated. Send text messages to hundreds of, more than 100 countries around the world, as well as answer calls and do things like that. And if you have done it before Twilio, it's actually very complicated because the way every telecom company does it is very different. And Twilio did not build a data center or telecom center where they own anything. It basically smoothed out all these differences across many providers and offered a single API that is easy to use. And that is the product, right? That is not means to end other than any product is a tool that allows us to get the job done. So I think APIs are products, and one of the most obvious thing you can notice that supports that notion is that if you look at the web services from like 5 and 10 years ago, those were usually owned, run, and operated by IT departments. And increasingly, if you look at the API programs, right, if you look at the typical API manager or director of the API, those are in the product teams. So APIs, modern APIs, the ones that support mobile mobility and Internet of Things and other things, are not put in the support department, not put in the infrastructure, not put in the IT services. They are in the product teams, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And because it has to do a lot with the user experience and creating the overall user experience, a lot of very successful APIs are actually managed as products, and I personally believe that contributes a lot to their success.
So we've got two pretty different opinions here, right?
Yeah, the problem with a question like this, there's kind of an embedded question about what these things are, right? So it becomes almost a question about definitions. What is a product? What is an API? Irakli describes an API in a certain context, and then he gives us a definition of a product. I think a better question is, what's the value of doing this? And if we apply treating your API like a product, no matter what that API is, you start to get some of the value Irakli talked about, right? Because if you take a product design approach, it means you're thinking about the consumers of the product. You're applying those kinds of lessons. So that means even if you consider your API to be a SOAP interface, you can still take a product-centric view of the SOAP interface, right? And think about how people might use it, how best to market it, having that external view. That's the value of this whole product thing, right? It's not about what category you put in, what definition it is. It's about taking that design perspective. To me, that's the huge value.
Great. Mike, can I get your input on this one?
Yeah, sure. I really think Ronnie's nailed it. What it is it has to do with what your focus is about. Are you trying to solve a problem? Do you know your customer? Do you know your audience? I think one of the other things that we find out when we talk about a company using an API to promote their message or get their content out, sometimes it's a very sort of a roundabout way to do it. The classic case that I tell very often is the notion of somebody creating an application, an API that supports an app to find stores, like find the store nearest you. Well, the real value of that API and that app is not to actually help me find a store, it's to help the company figure out where to build new stores, right? So there are lots of reasons you might create an API that fosters a value or fosters a need either inside the company or in your user community. Getting closer to customers, knowing where customers are, helping them find what they need, giving customers an opportunity to speak to you, to tell you more about how to run your business. These are all very, very valuable, and they're not necessarily a product that you might pick off a shelf that's been packaged. So there are lots of ways to think about APIs, and I think it was said earlier, a lot of people started, so well, let's just expose some of our data, if that's an API. We need one of those API things. We need one of those mobile app things. We need one of those website things. We kind of go through these cycles, and people are starting to refine, I think, their point of view on it. What you want to do is solve a real problem. If you're solving a real problem, it'll be a success.
Great. I got to say I agree. Let's move on here. We have another question from Vishal, and he'd like to know the panel's view on the usage of JSON schema. So he wants to know if are folks using it, and what does adoption look like? Who wants to take this first? Maybe Irakli, do you want to answer this?
JSON schema is emerging as a de facto standard of enforcing constraints on the messages. But I would be very careful in using it, because there is definitely this web principle of be very liberal about what you accept and be very conservative about what you give to people, which most of web's architecture is based on, right? So I would caution against using web schema to create very strict enforcement APIs that are not liberal at accepting the input. But I think it's a very useful tool, but I will try to not overuse it in the context of APIs.
Great.
From a security perspective, right, things like schema are helpful because they limit the amount of variability. You can start to restrict requests to what you want. But here's the difference. What Irakli said is very true. You don't necessarily have to put that out for everyone to use. It could be something that you use after you receive the message. So then if your interface changes, you can update the schema and just deploy it for yourself, but you still get some of that validation, right, to protect against buffer overruns and weird kinds of messages. So the key is, I wouldn't recommend using the schema, JSON schema, for example, right now as a way of communicating what your interface looks like or anything like that. But I think there's a lot of use for it internally to protect systems.
Yeah, let me just say, I just actually put something in the chat window. This came across my desk earlier this week or late last week. There's someone who built a forms designer based on JSON schema. It's actually based on Hyper schema because it has some other features that let you describe puts and gets and the whole thing. I think there are lots of ways to think about this space. I really agree with Irakli in the sense that if you use schemas, whether it's JSON or XSD, use schemas to constrict what you accept, you're creating a lot of errors. So I think I like Ronnie's approach, which is I can use schema internally to validate a lot of things that might be kind of difficult. I can at least validate some quality values. I can certainly validate shape and content. But I think there are other creative ways of thinking about schema, and this editor is one example of that. It may be a way to start driving things. If I can actually send someone information that helps them know how to construct a UI or how to create an information package that a bot can send from A to B, there's some real value there, and schema is just one of the many ways to do that.
Well, we've got a question here that kind of follows up a little bit about JSON, and it's Naveen is saying one of the big limitations of REST or JSON-based APIs is the inability to use the schema for validating the data structures. How big of an issue really is that, and how is the industry dealing with that at the moment?
Right. So I think validation is, through schemas is one possibility. I think the other thing to point out is, and I kind of harp on this a lot when I speak in public, but it's important to figure out that we're not actually shipping objects around, we're shipping messages around. So a lot of times what you really need to do is validate content, not validate the shape. It doesn't be the child of this or the parent of that or so on and so forth. They need to be just simple values. And it's easy to validate in a lot of ways. It's also easy to send validation messages to clients ahead of time so that you don't have to wait for the server to validate that message. Server always needs to, but you can also send hints as well to the client. So I don't think it's a limit of JSON or of REST or of XML or of RPC or any of those things. You have lots of tools available, and it's a matter of using the tools and thinking through the process.
Great.
That's me. Yeah.
Well, there's some more Hypermedia questions here that I'd like for you to get a chance to look at, Mike. So Kurt asks, when it comes to Hypermedia API responses, how far should the API go in terms of providing the client with the way to do stuff? So if I have a response with 3 possible links, should I provide a form for each, or would a description of the data needed be enough and allow the client to parse and contact the server as it prefers?
Well, I'll start with this, and I think I'm going to try to toss this to Ronnie and see if this works. How much information you provide someone on what you can do next has a lot to do with, usability. If you give me a dashboard with 72 buttons that aren't well explained, I'm going to have a hard time figuring out which one I want. The same thing works in any kind of user interface, whether that user interface is for humans or for machines. While the rules are different, the principle is the same. It's important to give me things that I'm going to need to know in order to move forward. And I think one of the big challenges we have as we start to build applications that are more than just one-off or bespoke applications for an API, if we're building applications that have options and that can sort of see what's possible, we're going to have to figure out how to express it in a way. We have to express enough information in the message rather than do it all ahead of time. Most of the customers I work with, what they do is they create an API, a data-driven API, and then write a lot of human documentation that developers translate into code. If they change that API, they change the documentation, and the developers change the code. That's going to be really hard to sustain, especially if we get into the tens and tens and tens of billions of devices and clients. So we need to figure out a way to make messages more usable and include the right amount of information. What usability is and how you test that usability is a very, very mature space. And that's where I'm going to toss this to Ronnie, because Ronnie really is our man on usability.
The API space is really interesting because we effectively have these two users, right, like you described. And it's really difficult to find people who get that at the moment. So they're either completely designing for the human developer, or we see some people in the hypermedia space completely designing for machines and they've forgotten about the human, right? And I think what we're trying to do right now is find that balancing point between, you know, in terms of the cycle of someone learns about your API, develops something, and then that machine uses your API. What's the perfect point? I don't know if there's answers yet, but it's a really good space to explore.
Yeah. Irakli, would you like to chime in here? I know you probably got some great input.
Can you guys hear me now? I'm trying to speak louder. So I'm not as smart as Mike. Let's just start with that. So I have some hacks to survive by not being as smart, and I don't think at the level that he does. So I have some shortcuts. So I want to share one of them with you, which is when I'm designing an API, right? Because I can't really think at that high level with that abstraction. I try to remember that the Hypermedia service that we're all very familiar with is World Wide Web itself, right? So all the web pages that we interact with are almost perfect Hypermedia services. They're human-centric, they're not machine-centric, but they are most definitely the most proper Hypermedia that we have around. Most Hypermedia APIs are probably not as Hypermedia as most web pages, right? So when you think about the decisions while designing a Hypermedia API, the shortcut I take is, how would I do if I was just building a web page, right? So if I'm building a home page of a website, I do have to make all the same decisions, right? Because nobody goes to a web page and carries a manual with them explaining what to do with the web page. We're very used to, I'm going to go to the web page, and it's going to tell me everything I can do with that website, right? So think about the same process, much like you would decide what forms you put on the home page of your website, what are the links that take you to the sections of the website, and then you may have some forms. The same exact information architecture decisions go into the designing of a good Hypermedia API, right? So yes, it has to be machine readable. Yes, it is in most cases JSON and not HTML, but the thinking process is very similar. So that's the shortcut I take, and if I grow up to be smarter, maybe I won't have to do it, but for now, that helps me a lot.
Well, apparently you have somebody that agrees with you, Irakli. So Kevin says, I do what Irakli does. I tend to think of how UI might use my API to build a web page, but I don't design the API for UI. I just use it as a guide.
We have to remember that at the end, our APIs are going to be used on the mobile, on Google Glass, and other things. So don't think about layouts, but functionally, information architecture-wise, it's a very similar process. So great point.
Right. We have, I guess this is a shorter question, but Andres asks, have you guys heard about RAML? If so, what do you think as part of taking an API design first approach? And Kurt says RAML rocks.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with that. I'm not a fan of RAML, but I know that it's getting very popular. RAML basically allows someone to write out in, it's YAML basically, a description of a service, right? So the service has these resources at these URLs that take these methods and these arguments. And I guess that's pretty good for generating service code, right? So I could use that as part of tooling where I don't write code. This is almost like a way of doing UML or some other things like that. The challenge I think RAML has is RAML is really focused on exposing a resource and the HTTP methods on that. I think they may support other protocols, but I haven't seen anyone using it with XMPP or MQTT or WebSockets or stuff like that yet. And I think our challenge for describing services is bigger. It's more than just generating server code. It's also generating client code and understanding what the promise or the contract is between parties. If I promise 50 URLs and I promise you know, a certain method on every one of those, that's a pretty tight contract. That means if I add a URL, I break the contract. It means if I change one of the methods, I break the contract. So I think it's important for us to think about a broader picture. And I go back to the thing that I say very often. I gave a talk earlier this year. One of my favorite lines from a recent Disney movie is from the movie Up. It's when this talking dog first says, meets humans, and it says, "I have just met you and I love you." And the idea is that even though we've never met before, we have a chance to communicate and get something done. When we over-constrain our services, that's really hard to do. I have to learn a whole bunch before I start. So I think RAML is trying to solve a really, really important problem. RAML is one of about a dozen formats, but there are a lot of other formats out there. There are a lot of other ways to look at this problem, and I think we still got a lot of work in the service description space.
So Kurt is kind of following up a little bit here, saying, we're using RAML to replace Word files when it comes to documenting APIs to clients. It's parsed and used internally to give us free validation, routing, and other ancillary services based on RAML JSON schemas within, and it encourages contract-first design.
Right. I can definitely see RAML's value for generating human readable contact, you know, contracts and documentation. I'm not a fan of contract first, but I know a lot of people use it. You know, I think the web is not based on contract first, and I'd like to see a lot of services adopt more of the web principle as well. But you know, I love to see people working in this space. So the more we see, the more people use it, the more we find out what it's powerful and what it's good for, and I think everybody wins.
So what alternative are we suggesting?
Let me jump in here. I think what Mike just pointed out, right? There's if you pay attention, there's been incredible movement and development in the last just in the last couple of months on service description languages. And if we call out RAML, I think we should also call out API Blueprint, which is what I'm a big fan of. And there's Swagger 2.0, which is just launched. So there's a lot of different approaches, which are all, obviously there's a need in the market. I'm not quite sure if the need in the market is just that people want to have the same capabilities that they had with WSGL, where they throw in the WSGL and then they get code generated from it. But certainly there seems to be some movement in the market, some need in the market, which is why a lot of smart people are looking at service description languages. I would be careful if RAML is the one, or Swagger is the one, or Blueprint is the one. I think ultimately every designer or every engineer works slightly different. And I think if we know one thing from the past, it's usually the one size fits all fails, right? I think it actually gets me a little bit on a side topic. I think a lot of we seem to be recreating parts of I mean, there's a reason why no one wants to talks about SOAP and web services anymore, right? It's not that SOA is wrong, it's not SOA's fault, but it's just that at some point that whole standards body, that whole kind of that drive to fix everything and to make it standardized restrained our degree of freedom such that people felt they couldn't do a real good job anymore. And this is, I think, when REST really took off. And when I had folks explain to me, well, what's the difference between REST and web service or SOAP? It's, you know, some folks said SOAP is the freedom not to think, and REST is the freedom to think. And I think a lot of people are embracing REST, and now we have this counter movement again to kind of take out the freedom to think and make it more, you know, like standardized and fixated and stuff like this. And I think you be aware of anything which calls like the one size fits all, you know, the ring which finds them all. I think those efforts usually kind of a lot of money is invested in it, a lot of efforts are spent on it, and usually fails. So I actually like that there are different service description languages. I see someone like Layer 7, for instance, being a neutral mediator for description languages. We should just take whatever description language comes our way, and we should make it usable. I personally look forward for the moment I can use API Blue on our gateway. But again, that's a personal choice. That's the way I work, and that's the way I think.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of back and forth here. I don't think there's a clear agreement, because we have Kurt saying he completely disagrees, and he can have the freedom and intelligence on the back end, but expose it in different ways via an API documentation language of his choice. So, I mean, I think it's a hot topic. Mike, were you going to follow up there?
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. So if Kurt's getting what he needs done, then there is absolutely no reason for him to pay attention to anybody else. I mean, he can do that. That's great. That's sort of the point I made. I want to see more of this. I want to see more people building things. One of the things, sort of like to follow up with Holger, is I want to see lots of people thinking creatively about this problem. I spend a lot of time now building clients. Right now, I'm not seeing any of these description languages help me to build good clients. I'd love to see people start to show me that. I have lots of cases where things change over time. I have applications that I built 8, 9, 10 years ago that are still running. Things change. So far, most of the examples that I've seen of the tools that do these descriptions don't allow for that change over time without regenerating code. So there are lots and lots of opportunities here. And as long as we're building cool stuff, as long as people are working on these, I think we're in great shape. When we start to say, this one's no good, this is the only one, that's when I think we're in trouble. And I think we're far from that. We got lots and lots of opportunity yet.
Well, since Ronnie has been so quiet, I think I'm going to throw an API design question here. I'd like Ronnie to get first grabs at it. On API design, should an API be coarse or fine-grained? If fine-grained, how about reusability? Should we let the API evolve by creating multiple versions?
That's a kind of a tough question to answer, right? You know, you can't say whether something should be coarse or fine-grained unless you know what it's being used for, who's using it, you know, all those circumstances. I mean, essentially, you have to design it. And to design something, you have to get a better idea of how it's going to be used, who's going to be using it. There's trade-offs, right? If you make something very coarse-grained, then you might require many more requests to get details, for example. If you have a collection with lots of fine-grained details within it, then you could increase bandwidth, right? Messages get bigger. So I don't think there's a rule. I don't think there's an answer. What I usually do to figure that kind of stuff out, in the extreme case, is actually start to build personas for who I think the developers should be, and start to play that out from their position, right? And a really, really, really useful thing you can do that doesn't require all of that, you know, UX work is just write client code for whatever interface you make. I mean, it's such an easy thing to do, and as soon as you do that, you start to see what makes sense. In terms of you know, reusability, that's a slightly tougher one. I think I remember from like the SOA days, there was this massive focus on reusability, right? That's all we ever talked about. And it felt like the way towards reusability was to create services, right? And then you create lots of services, and then the reason things weren't getting reused was because people weren't people weren't being forced to use that services, right? So that was the path. It kind of feels like we're taking a different approach in this space, where reusability can happen because people want to use APIs, right? So it's the carrot versus stick kind of approach. I would also say, I don't know if reusability of the interface is necessarily what we really want. It's more reusability of the components and the services that are behind it, right? So I don't see any reason why you can't have different kinds of interfaces for different types of users. I'm more interested in that as value than, you know, having an interface that's reused by 100 different applications. That's my view.
Okay, I hope that answers it. I mean, we've got quite a few questions to get through, so let's maybe try and move on a little bit here. I mean, do you guys want to talk about 18F launches API and element tools for federal? If anybody's unaware, 18F is maybe one of you guys would like to explain it, but my understanding is 18F is really an agency that's there to help government adopt technologies faster or be more agile in that sense. Do you guys want to talk about this one? Ronnie, do you have an opinion?
All over this stuff. I'm going to pass it over to them.
Sorry, you were muted at the beginning there.
Yeah, I'm going to pass this over to Holger and Iraqi, who I know are actually very focused on this specifically.
Okay, Holger, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I keep looking at them, and I actually think so. Fair enough. I'm in Germany, so I'm kind of a distant observer of this space. I have had some exposure to federal, but it certainly looks like for me from the outside that the federal team, especially the 18F team, is really getting its stuff together there. I like what they did in terms of the API guidance style, which is just sitting on GitHub, and you can just take it, import it, and edit it. So it seems to be they're creating, at least for right now, they seem to be striking the right balance between being prescriptive and giving blueprints, but without being too prescriptive and kind of, again, you know, one of my pet peeves is one size fits all approaches, which tend to fail. So I'm hugely supportive of that. I think they're really doing great work, and ultimately, and you know, I want to make a shout out to Pin Lane here. He seems to agree that the federal team seems to finally get their act together and really produce some very useful assets even for the community at large, not just the federal team. I'm actually recommending now to a whole bunch of clients that they should look at that stuff the team has put together and pick up there. But it would be interesting what Iraqi sees it, because he is much closer to it.
So I'm a little bit biased because a bunch of people at 18F are friends, but I'll try to be as unbiased as possible. So from what I understand, 18F is not really an agency. It's a cross-agency working group that is trying to promote and educate government, especially federal government, about APIs. And I believe it is led by General Services Administration. I think what they are doing is extremely important, and the document they published recently is also very striking, because I remember there was a similar, so there's a whole bunch of very smart troublemakers in the government space now. So people who came from non-government places that have a lot of experience and are trying to really change the status quo is the best thing mindset that a lot of governments have by default, right? So what they're doing is extremely important. And the document that was published a couple of days ago was also very striking, because I'm comparing it to some of the API standards that a similar team at the White House tried to publish a year ago. And you can see a huge difference between the focus of the document a couple of days ago and the document a year ago. The document a year ago was very technical. It talked mostly about some established common things that people do with APIs, like what methods to use on HTTP, things like that, some of which we may agree, some of which we may disagree, but it was very tactical. The document that 18F published is very strategic. It also goes into much detail, but it really concentrates about the user experience of the APIs and how to publish the APIs and how to manage and maintain the APIs that people will actually use and people will actually enjoy using. So in that sense, I thought that it was a huge step in the right direction, and I thought that it was really we'll probably look back at the document years down the road and look at the seminal step, making sure that people start building usable APIs, APIs that actually solve problems, not only in government, but I think documents can be used for large enterprises and the industry in general. I really like it.
So, Holger, you've been typing out a few things here. Do you want to kind of give us some thoughts on really what you're saying here about embracing standards? Kind of let's chat it out so that we have this out there too.
So are you pointing out that I wasn't on mute when I was typing and heard the key clicks?
No, I'm just monitoring the chat. I think it'll be good for everyone.
Yeah, let me quickly go back to the chat. Yeah, so I was reacting to that notion of that if you are, what was it here? By the way, Sublime rocks. So I'm Sublime user too. Somehow that if you're in an enterprise, you need to standardize everything to lower cost and to lower the learning curve. Now, if you look at my past, I have been both in a mixture of startups and really, really large enterprises. So CA just being the second company acquiring startup I worked in. The first one was IBM. And I have seen both things work, right? And I think one thing works better than the other. But that's my personal experience, right? There are companies who embrace the right tool for the job approach. So they let their teams essentially give them freedom to use whatever language they want in order to do that job they were tasked to do, for as long as they expose it as a service which can be invoked by other clients or other services, right? And so you end up, yes, and it's a little bit scary, and but I think it's the same kind of scariness as you do if you really do agile, if you really do lean, when you embrace the philosophy, not just the tools. So I'm sitting here in the heart of the German car manufacturing country, so obviously lean technology from Toyota is a big topic. And I had a friend who came back from Toyota and says, it's amazing. They actually give you all the tools they have. And I asked that Toyota guy and said, why are you doing that? And don't you know I work for a company who remains to be unnamed? He says, the Toyota guy says, sure, you can have all the tools you want. If you don't understand the philosophy, all those tools will mean nothing to you. And I want to take this and essentially apply to our situation. Right? I've seen too many companies who standardize the wrong things. They standardize on languages. They standardize on vocabularies. They standardize on morphologies. They standardize all the different things. The one thing they don't standardize on is culture. It's philosophy. It's an approach of to solve things rather than standardizing the solution. And so, actually, I think we can embrace diversity. It actually makes us stronger. A company who has skills in Go, in PHP, in Java, in C#, in C++, whatever, that company ultimately can be much more agile, can be much faster on the market with new services and can react to the market than everything where so-called core competency is Java. And how many projects have you been, and I'm asking the audience, like, which get just shut down because the answer is, well, that's not our core competency. Sure, there's an opportunity market, but we are not equipped to solve this. And sorry, that was kind of a little bit of a rant, but I think APIs is a similar thing. I think there's a danger. There's some things you should standardize, in particular about how you approach things. But I think if you drive standardization too far, you're going to end up with a huge pile of stuff built which is outdated the moment you move. Again, my opinion. I'm open. Let the flame wars start.
Well, I mean, we've had some differing opinions on the chat the whole time, so I mean that's always great to see. And
so
we're getting really close to the end here too.
Okay, let me give a last differing opinion, because you
Yeah.
want people to know we have different opinions on this stuff internally, right? I think Holger addresses a bigger idea of culture. If we just look at simply the usability, the learnability of an interface, how quickly I can pick something up, write some code, and get going. That kind of stuff is massively important, right? We can't just dismiss it. We can't say, well, there's a cost to using standards that might be bad culturally or philosophically. Familiarity is a massively important part of this build, right? In the same way that the keyboard in front of you is a QWERTY keyboard. Maybe not optimized for everything, but it's what we know, so it's easy to use. We shouldn't disregard that stuff, right? You have to make intelligent decisions, but I don't like decisions that are black and white, where we say now standards are not important because they restrict our ability to create and be innovative as companies. The other side doesn't make sense either, and maybe that's what Holger is kind of relating to here, this idea. We've been in organizations like this where there's a central architecture team and they decide what the standard for interfaces will be, and no one is allowed to deviate from that. I think that's also dangerous. But if you're choosing to use standards-based interfaces to improve the experience for your user, I think that's laudable. I think that's a great goal. Well, of course, there's other things to consider, right? Architectural constraints, the properties of it, performance, like bigger other things. But learnability is a valid reason to go down that road.
I totally agree with you, and this is why I like what 18F has put out. I think so far they have struck the right balance between documenting best practices, but not predicting or standardize future solutions. And that's, I think, where balance should be.
Yeah, well, we're getting towards the end here, guys. I just want to take a minute before we do go and finish off to talk about the API Academy. Since we've mentioned the API Academy and we're all part of the API Academy, some people here might not really be aware of what it is the API Academy is and what you guys are doing out there. So maybe, Ronnie, you can have just a few minutes to explain it to everybody here, what it is and what you guys do.
Yeah, really quickly, our goal is to help people design better APIs and design great APIs. It's that simple and it's that big, right? That's the objective. So individually, we do a lot of stuff, like Araku's all over linked APIs. You see Mike creating all kinds of specs and books, and Holger and I are writing articles and doing whatever we can. But as a team, we have a few team things we do. We run public workshops, so I actually have 2 coming up in Spain and Portugal. We have a summit. I'm going to hand over to Araku to talk about that big summit in DC in a second. And then we also offer like on-site, hold your hand kind of. If you're thinking of designing an API and you want an expert to come in and guide you through that process, we have boot camps we do between 1 to 3 days. So we've got a lot out there for you, everything from strategy to helping you with hackathons, right? Go to the website if you want more details about those things. That's apiacademy.co. But I want to pay special attention to this 360 summit we have coming up. I want to hand it over to Araku, who's all over that space, and he'll tell you why you might want to be there.
We're going to have API 360 summits all around the world. We're going to have one in Europe. We're going to have one in the US, and maybe possibly one more place to be still determined. But the closest one is on September 12th in Washington, D.C. We already have the agenda for this summit, and it's shaping up to be an extremely important summit, talking about most things related, some of the most hottest topics about the APIs. And we're really happy to have a wonderful roster of people who will be both speaking as well as attending. So if you're anywhere near Washington, D.C. around September 12th, I would highly recommend, and you're interested in APIs, this would be the event to go to. We will have Ray Brooks from 18F keynoting and opening the summit, and an equally interesting list of panelists and speakers who will give you a very well-rounded perspective about the APIs. And it will be both people from API Academy as well as people from government, from public sector as well as commercial sector, really giving a good round of view about what is that they're actually seeing as problems and some of the challenges. And most importantly, it will be the place to talk to others. There will be many more attendees than the speakers, and it will be a chance to really meet people who are really treating APIs as the day job, and share some of your thoughts, share what you're working on, what they're working on. I think it's going to be a great event, so I highly recommend to attend it if you can.
Great, and on top of that too, you can come to the website and there's some introductory content that will really guide you through quite a few of these things. So some of the stuff that we've touched on today, if you go to the website, there are articles, there's lessons. The way we've kind of structured the content is for you to learn based on sort of this discussion. There's a lot of content up there for you to kind of learn from. So if you'd like to go there and register, it's kind of a class-based learning site. It's also a great resource if you'd like to go there to register for that. And anybody who'd like to go to the summit, we also have, I've put it in through the chat, but it's apiacademy.co/API360. So if anybody's welcome, it's a free event. If you're in Washington, D.C., it's a summit. We're going to have all these presenters that are actually mentioned, and it's going to be a huge event, and it's definitely not one you want to miss. So at this point, I think we've reached the end of our presentation. So I just want to give everybody a chance to say our final goodbyes here, and thank you all for coming and asking your questions and sticking around for the whole hour. I know we went a little bit long, so thanks everybody for joining us, and we hope to see you soon.
Ending. It was fun.